Ntaimenera kuti ndi chaka chimozi kunali njala ndiye zimakanga tizokudya zimachepa chifukwa kesekero anga imasika.
Y después de que uno ha trabajado tanto, dejar uno todo, tal vez es duro.
Tôi tham gia cái dự án USAID về có dự án hỗ trợ về giống, về phân bón, về kỹ thuật.
أنا ساعدت في المصاريف تحت إخواتي من دخل المصاريف اللي أنا كسبتها. كلها الأسرة فرحانة بي إن أنا بقيت سيدة أعمال كبيرة يعني.
Этот бизнес дал нам возможность жить достойно, реализовать себя в виде вот продукта, который мы делаем, и приносить пользу этим продуктам.
ماما وبابا علموني إن أتعامل مع الناس كويس وأساعد كل اللي محتاج.
For me as a US citizen, it's about sharing this sense of democracy, this sense of generosity.
La situación cambió mucho en cuanto pobres pero vivimos bien. Esa es la esperanza de nosotros, día por día mejor, y que la paz sea para siempre, para el campo, para la familia, para todos.
Take me off mute so I can unmute me. It's time. So good morning or good afternoon to you from wherever you've joined us from across the world. I'm Tom Garrett, and Secretary General of the Community of Democracies, and it's my real pleasure to welcome you today to this conversation on women's economic empowerment. We're very privileged to have with us Ms. Michelle Bekkering, the Assistant Administrator of the Bureau for Economic Growth, Education, and Environment at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Just a few weeks ago, the Community of Democracies hosted a discussion on women's leadership in times of crisis. And we heard about initiatives from women in our member states, such as Finland, Canada, and the Republic of Korea, all the things that they're doing to advance women's empowerment and participation in public life. Another initiative that was discussed that day was the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative of the United States of America. It was introduced to us by the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, Ambassador Kelly Curry. This initiative is a whole-of-government effort to advance women's economic empowerment, and in its very first year has already reached 12 million women worldwide. So in the time that we have together today, we're going to continue speaking about this topic, women's participation and leadership, focusing on women's economic empowerment and their key role in the economic recovery from COVID-19. And so without any further ado, I would like to introduce today's distinguished guest, Ms. Michelle Bekkering. Ms. Bekkering was sworn in as Assistant Administrator of the Bureau for Economic Growth, Education, and Environment, known as E3, on January 6, 2020. In this role, Ms. Bekkering leads the work for the U.S. Agency on International Development on high priority administration initiatives, including 1 Trillion Trees, the U.S. Government International Basic Education Strategy, and the previously mentioned Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, WGDP. Ms. Bekkering joined USAID in July 2017, and she concurrently served as the E3 Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator and also as the agency's Senior Coordinator for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment. During her tenure at USAID, she has led the Bureau's efforts to reorient its strategies and its partnerships and programs to achieve the vision of the journey to self-reliance. Under her leadership, USAID's new private sector engagement policy was launched, which included the creation and management of global mechanisms that catalyze partnerships with their private sector actors. Prior to joining USAID, Michelle served from 2005 to 2017 at the International Republican Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that's committed to advancing freedom and democracy worldwide. She and I worked together there for some 12 years in places like Afghanistan, Indonesia, and the countries of the former Soviet Union. Ms. Bekkering also has served in numerous positions in the US government, including on the National Security Council at the White House, and she has worked on Capitol Hill in the US Congress. So with that, let me welcome her. Michelle, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for that warm welcome. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you today, and to all your members and participants from around the world who have joined us. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to share the stage with you, my good friend, the Secretary General. And I can't think of a better leader for the community of democracies. You have been a lifelong advocate for free democratic societies, and it's really a pleasure to work with you. When I was thinking about the topic for today's discussion, I just thought, it's so poignant, right? And first of all, as you can see, like many of us, I find myself, very much affected, both professionally and personally, by the pandemic. Like many of you, I'm working from home. I'm juggling homeschooling, my small child, and we're still really dedicated to ensuring that the strong work and the projects and programs we have around the world, frankly, do not lose any of their momentum. And so it's a great delight to be here today. And I do want to give a moment to say the community of democracies is a really important partner in all of our efforts. This is an impressive membership. You really represent the leadership of the free world, and you're a reminder, an important reminder, I think, especially in today, of the world, of humanity's enduring desire to pursue democratic, citizen responsive government. And you offer us a really high-level global platform, frankly, that allows all of us as member countries to really drive policies and ideas and ideals that are going to make our world more prosperous and secure and stable. And that's really the reason we're here today. When we talk about advancing women's economic empowerment and equality, and when we couple that with the promotion of democratic, transparent governance, we really have the ingredients for what we need to create peaceful and prosperous societies. So to that end, I do want to thank the community of democracies for your strong support, for your recent series of conversations around women's empowerment, and specifically to the Secretary General for your recent statement on the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, which frankly reminded us all that when we seek to advance equality for women everywhere, it's in all of our interests. So thank you for that. So I'm here today representing the U.S. Agency for International Development, and I'm really proud to be here in this seat. USAID has long believed that empowered women are a powerful force that contribute to our global peace and prosperity. And our work daily seeks to advance our U.S. national security and economic prosperity. We demonstrate American generosity, and we seek to promote a path to self-reliance and resilience. We look at the countries where we're working as our true partners in development. And nowhere more so than in our efforts to empower women, specifically women's economic empowerment, do we really see a return on these investments. So as the Secretary General mentioned, I'm really proud to be here today to tell you a little bit more about the Trump administration's Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative. And really this, I would say this was born out of really the president's national security strategy, which really laid out the important correlation of how women's economic empowerment around the world is tied to American peace and prosperity. And through WGDP, which was launched by the White House, what we're doing is bringing a new energy, right? A comprehensive approach to this mission of global women's economic empowerment. And this is really the first of its kind for us in the US government. WGDP brought together 10 executive branches in US government agencies, along with embassies and USAID missions around the world. And together in 1 year alone, WGDP directly economically empowered more than 12 million women worldwide. And we're so excited about that. And I'm delighted to talk today and think of ideas where we can work more with the community of democracies as a platform, but also your member states in our shared objectives. So through WGDP, and you probably heard this a little bit from my colleague, Ambassador Curry, we're really focused on 3 pillars, right? So we're looking at women's economic empowerment through 3 areas. 1, we need women to prosper in the workforce. 2, we need women to succeed as entrepreneurs. And 3, we need women enabled in the economy. So through WGDP, it established the WGDP Fund at USAID. And this was really important, right? This put funding behind our efforts and behind the initiative. It's brought us new resources to the agency. It's created new metrics for us to really identify if our work is meeting our goals. And it's also really given us a laser sharp focus for us to really dig into what are those barriers that are keeping women from having a chair at the economic table. So we're in our 2nd year now of the WGDP Fund, and it totals $200 million. And it's really important because we're looking at a couple things. 1, we're looking at what do we know works, right? And scaling up proven approaches. But it's also allowed us a really incredible opportunity to source innovative new ideas that we can pilot. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more because we really are seeking your innovative ideas in this partnership. So as I mentioned earlier, we find ourselves in a remarkable time, right? And when I'm talking about women's participation and women's empowerment and women's equality, there really is no more of an important time than now, as the entire world, is really affected by this global pandemic. And we need to work together. We need to make sure in all of our efforts that we are closely synced. So since the outbreak of the pandemic, the US government has committed more than $1.6 billion in State Department and USAID assistance. And this funding is actively saving lives in more than 120 countries around the world. In my job as Assistant Administrator for Economic Growth, Education, and the Environment, I've also been tasked at looking at what we're calling the 2nd order impacts of this pandemic, recognizing how the global economy has been crippled, how we are seeing, as I mentioned earlier, less opportunities for maybe many of our children around the world to have direct access to education. And so looking at what are those 2nd order impacts and how we can address that. And that's where this topic comes in so importantly. We must continue to prioritize women as key drivers of the economic recovery from this crisis. Women's leadership, their meaningful participation in both COVID-19 prevention as well as response are going to be critical, not only to our life-saving humanitarian measures, but also to longer-term economic recovery. So to that end, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, we also recognize women and girls are very likely to be disproportionately affected by both the immediate as well as the longer term impacts of the pandemic. Economically, I think of the women we work with who most often tend to hold more informal jobs or more vulnerable positions within formal jobs. So we're really worried that they may, 1, lose their positions or that their earnings will be interrupted. Then I think of women who are entrepreneurs or have access to credit. The impact is going to be really great for these women, right? Because many of these women were worried who already may have, undesirable credit terms may now find themselves unable to repay some of these loans, leading to further losses. So these are all things we are thinking about daily in our approach. And I would just say in closing, you know, as USAID acting administrator John Barsa often says, we cannot have prosperity by excluding one half of the workforce. You know, no society is going to succeed unless all women succeed. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the privilege to partnering with you today, to discussing this important issue with you. And I look forward to an active discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. And that was a really interesting outline of USAID's approach to advancing women's economic empowerment. And so it does lead to maybe a few questions or a few points we could discuss. You've clearly stated that women's economic empowerment is central to the success of vibrant and durable democratic societies. And you've described a bit of how USAID is approaching women's economic empowerment. What are the agency's current priorities? You've outlined those somewhat, but could you maybe give us really the most pressing current priorities?
No, thank you. And I'd be happy to delve into that a little deeper. So as my team knows, I love giving statistics, right? Because I think this just really frames what we're talking about. And so many of you may know this, but I think it's so striking, right? We first of all look at this. This is the right thing to do, right? But it's also really the smart economic thing to do. So I read very closely, as do many of you, the Global Gender Report that comes out each year. And when we looked at the 2020 data, it was just striking, right? So if women's economic participation and opportunity continues at the current rate we see now, it is going to take 257 years for them to reach economic equality with men. Yet we have seen time and time again through our data that some of the greatest returns on our foreign assistance investments result from women's economic empowerment. And so this is an area that we have long championed, an area we have long worked in, but WGDP has offered us really new energy, right? And this really laser-like focus of how we get to that. So let me start about how we do that. So all of our work and our approach to women's economic empowerment is very straightforward, right? We identify the gaps women face, and then we design the interventions, accumulate the partnerships we need to close and address those gaps. It's very simple, but this takes time and it takes thoughts, right? So what are we looking at? We're really looking at these three pillars. You know, we need to make sure that women have equal access to opportunities for good paying jobs, right? Jobs in the formal sector. We need to make sure women can access credit to start or grow a business. And finally, we need to make sure women have the legal rights they need, from everything from property rights to, you know, the right to, you know, actually access credit or have individual rights under the law in a country, right? We're looking for respect, equality, and dignity. So let me talk about partnerships. One of the ways we do this is by recognizing the strength of partnerships. When we identify the gaps, when we start designing the programs, what we do immediately is we start reaching out to our partners. And I'll do this in three ways. We look at our private sector partners, recognizing that 9 out of 10 jobs in the emergency markets around the world, they're created by the private sector, right? They're not created by government. So we need the private sector as partners. 2, we need bilateral partnerships. I'll talk a little bit more about the legal aspects of this and why that's so important. We need to work with a host government, right? We need to have an enabling environment that allows women to succeed and prosper. And 3rd, and most importantly, we need women in our partner countries. We need local organizations. We need the local leaders who best know the context of what issues women are facing and can therefore help us really determine what are the best interventions to meet them. So let me give you just maybe 2 quick examples just to give you an illustrative kind of vision of how we're approaching this. So I'm talking about Australia, right? Another partner member of ours here in the community of democracies. So we have worked with the government of Australia on this really great innovative financing. So we've created an innovative impact bond. And what we're doing is through the proceeds of this bond, we're going to actually raise the money to help underserved women in Asia and the EU to eliminate the barriers to women's ownership and inheritance of property in the country of Burundi. So we're really excited about that. I'll also talk about India and some of our work in India. In India, we have partnered with a private sector company, many of you know, PepsiCo, and we're working with the governance in India, specifically in West Bengal, to do two things. One, we're trying to make sure that women farmers in India have access to property rights so that they can exercise rights to the land they're currently farming, or be able to buy more land under their title. We're also working to make sure women have the training they need to be really able in today's current market to run successful agribusinesses, right? This is really important because at the end of the day, it will allow them to better be partners and be included in Pepsi's global supply chains, which is a really a huge benefit for these women farmers. So these are just a couple quick examples of how we're working through partnerships to really be successful in our goals.
Well, this year is the 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration, which is the founding document of the Community of Democracies. And the Warsaw Declaration principles very clearly recognize the importance of the political and economic inclusion of all women. But we still find today, as we look at the issue, there are still too often legal restrictions that limit a woman's ability to freely participate in the economy. I think you just referred to that in India. How does the work of WGDP help enable women to become equal economic actors?
First of all, I can't thank you more for bringing up a topic that is really so near and dear to my heart. And I want to say, as a moment of privilege, I had the great honor to attend the 10th anniversary celebrations in Poland 10 years ago for the Community of Democracies. And again, it is so amazing to me to see the Community of Democracies thriving and continuing to be such a wonderful a force for democracy around the world. So as the Secretary General knows, but for the more of you, I've spent a good portion of my career really focusing on women's political and legal rights. And why is that? We are not going to have sustainability of any of our efforts, specifically in this sphere of women's economic empowerment, if we do not work on the enabling environment. Women, we need to address and remove all of the barriers that inhibit, frankly, a woman's ability to succeed as business leaders, to advance in their career paths, or to build credit. And we recognize that the more we invest in women's economic empowerment, if we do not have a fair, let's say, playing field for women legally, we're not going to be sustainable. We are not going to hit maximum impact. And that's where a partnership specifically with our host partner countries is so important. It's also one of the primary focuses of WGDP. So in late December 2019, President Trump released a presidential memorandum. And this presidential memorandum was really important because it was on addressing the legal and societal barriers to women's global development and prosperity. And what this did is it called on the agencies in the US government who are part of WGDP to examine and focus work under Pillar 3 on 5 foundational areas. And so this is where we're going to really focus our efforts on removing those legal barriers, right? So we're looking at, number 1, we're looking at accessing institutions, okay? We're looking at building credit. We're looking at owning and managing property. Making sure women can travel freely, specifically across borders. And then 5, removing employment restrictions, which are still profound throughout the world. I'm always really blown away by statistics that show, I believe it's in more than 90 countries around the world, women are legally barred from holding the same positions or jobs than men. And so addressing these challenges are really foundational for us, meeting our goals. So I'm going to give another stat here, which I find just so telling. So the White House Council of Economic Advisors released an WGDP index earlier this year. And it looked specifically at these 5 areas, right, of legal reforms we're hoping to influence. And it found that if we were able to, meet our goals in these 5 areas globally, we could unlock $7.7 trillion US dollars in global annual GDP. I mean, that's incredible, right? When you think of global prosperity, when you think of peace and security. And so this is an area we are really going to focus on, right? We're going to focus on, as I said, those 5 areas. But what I also want to mention is we really recognize that social and cultural norms are a big part of our work. And this requires a very sensitive and a very thoughtful approach. I've had the great opportunity to live and work overseas. And one of the things that it has done the most for my career, it's taught me how to really focus on listening to our partners, looking at a local context, understanding what those social and cultural norms are, and how we can partner together to really find opportunities with a variety of partners to address and increase women's empowerment and equality. This takes partnership. It takes thoughtfulness, it takes sensibility. So one of the things I have found, and this has really been influenced by my work overseas, is that we oftentimes find just direct communication, transparent information, working with our male advocates is such a huge way for us to really be successful. We have found that even in what I think many people would consider a very traditional culture, men are oftentimes our advocates. When we sit down with men, when we sit down with women, leaders, et cetera, and say, this is why women's empowerment, this is why women's equality is so important. Here's what it offers families. Here's what it offers communities and countries. We find partners because we've come together around a shared understanding of what we're trying to do and how we both have a stake in it. And that's so really important. And so let me stop there, but let me just say this is something we take very seriously about, and we've appreciated our partnerships with so many women and men across the world as we seek to make our stride here.
Well, and so many of these things were underway the last few years. And then, of course, 2020, we had COVID-19. And so what have you seen as the impact of COVID-19 on women's economic empowerment? And what are some of those things that USAID is attempting to do to mitigate the impact of COVID-19?
I cannot overemphasize, the impacts we've seen of COVID-19 on every sector where we work, but an area I am increasingly concerned about is this topic today. It's women's economic empowerment, right? Worried that not only is the pandemic putting further stress on our efforts, but it's going to, possibly, regress and retract away from a lot of the development process we've already made. And again, I'm going to go back to partnerships. If we're going to get our global economies back to work, right? If we're going to get, our lives back up and running, women need to be at the forefront of those efforts. I think so often about my particular portfolio and looking at women's economic empowerment, trade, regulatory reform, and global supply chains. And I think one of the things that's been most striking is when we look at, first of all, the breakdown of, let's say, global supply chains, right? And we recognize the issues this is having. We've looked at stats that even say, what do we think the COVID-19 pandemic, what effects do we think it's going to have on society? And one of the most telling effects is poverty rates. We were looking at recent UNDP statistics that has showed us that the poverty rate for women alone is expected to rise to more than 9.1%, right? Just due to COVID-19. So that's almost a 10% rise in poverty. And we're also worried about the fact that we see such a large gender divide across the world. One of the things that I have seen in my own portfolio is that when the global supply chains broke down, we were looking all across the world. One, how can we keep women owned and led businesses, still able to produce and move their products? And one of the things we quickly realized is that we could really invest and increase our efforts when it came to e-trade, e-commerce. But one of the challenges we face, and it's being exacerbated by COVID-19, is the fact that we have a huge gender divide, right? Women in many countries do not have it all near the same levels to digital sources or resources as men do. And so for many women, that was not an immediate option for them to use. We're also, of course, looking at women who are trying to get into the formal labor markets and recognizing so many jobs, being lost, right? Businesses closing and other opportunities, especially in the informal business sectors, really being halted. So we're very concerned about that. So I'm just going to give an example of how we're looking at this. One, we're always going to look at, okay, so how can we bring more women into the digital community? The second thing we're looking at is, again, working with women. Specifically, I'm going to give an example here of our work with the Self-Employed Women's Association, right? These are oftentimes really wonderful groups of women who come together, who raise their own savings and capital and support their other members. And I'm going to give another example here from India, right? So in India, we're partnering with one of these associations. It's called SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association, Bharat. And we're working with them to actually provide economic and social support to their women members in this informal economy, because we're really concerned about how the pandemic is threatening, frankly, their own survival, to what I've said earlier and why these reasons. So through this partnership, we're aiming to reach 135,000 women by supporting the creation of an enabling environment that's going to allow these micro enterprises and these micro cooperatives to still be able to thrive. And then another thing I want to say is I really would be remiss if I didn't recognize the vital role, of course, women are playing as, sort of that first line of caregiving, right? So they're caregiving, they're healthcare workers, they're often at the front lines of caring for sick family members, of working in the hospitals and other health clinics. And also, as many of us know, as teachers, right? And so we're really concerned about that. So a lot of what we're looking at is how do we continue to empower women in these roles, right? And how do we continue to recognize the important role that they're still playing, because they are still doing these roles. I'll give one more example. I know Georgia is a proud country member, and so I just want to give an example of a program and partnership we're doing in Georgia. So we've been working with what we call a YES program in Georgia since 2015. And this program has actually helped more than 2,000 women start and expand their businesses. And so with our support in private sector investment, they were able to expand. And by 2024, they hope to support an additional 2,500 female entrepreneurs with finance and business training. And we have this really great example of one of our beneficiaries named Malo. So Malo is a woman, she's an artist, right? She's a wonderful artist, and she specializes in Georgian handicrafts. And she, with WGDP support, was able to open her business called Malo's Handmade. And while the pandemic has made business really more difficult, this is a great example where through this partnership in Georgia, she's been able to be provided the skills and the training where she has now been able to adapt a lot of her business to online, right? And so she's now able to go from, a physical distribution of her products to an online online commerce, where now she is able to sell these products much more widely. And so at the end of the day, I think what I want to end with is the fact that we recognize through COVID in every sector we work, but women's economic empowerment in this specifically, we've got to learn to identify those gaps and really help our women entrepreneurs create more flexible business models. Because I do think that one of the long-term sort of outcomes of COVID will be we are going to see a shifting landscape of what our global economy and supply chains look like.
Well, you've given us such fascinating examples of partnerships that AID has all over the world. And could you tell us just briefly a little bit more about how can partners engage with USAID to advance women's economic empowerment?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, and because I really do want to sort of end here my remarks today with a call to action. We need your partnership. As I said earlier, we need the partnership of the member countries in the community of democracies, yourself as this hugely important and influential democratic body across the world, and specifically our private sector partners and our local partners and NGOs. We need you all. We each have a very specific role we can play. And one of the important aspects of WGDP success is really collaborating and co-designing, right? Recognizing what USAID brings to the table, what a government, as I mentioned earlier, like Australia brings to the table, and of course, our partners in a country like Georgia, who help us understand what the key local challenges are and how we can work together. So I'm going to give a couple examples. One, I will never be able to underestimate the importance of networks and mentorships in your countries. If you're on today and you're from another member country in the government, really think about how you're investing in networks and mentorships for women. You know, I think this is such an important role a body like the community of democracies could play, right? You're this huge global platform. What a great opportunity for, you know, women to come together and share experiences. What has worked maybe in a country like, again, Georgia, and how you can adapt that and make that work in another member country. That's really important. Creating and really sustaining robust platforms for mentorship and networking. And I also want to talk about, again, you know, what I mentioned earlier, which is, you know, really looking at opportunities to get more women in the digital economy. So one of the examples I want to give today, you know, we're eagerly and actively seeking collaboration on one of our newest efforts. And this is called the WGDP Grand Challenge for Development. This goes hand in hand with one of our current challenges, which is called the Women Connect Challenge. Through the Women Connect Challenge, we're really seeking your ideas and your innovative opportunities, pilot projects, et cetera, how we bring more women online safely. And this is a procurement that you can find more information about on USAID's website. And then our newest Grand Challenge, which we're excited about, which we're calling simply the WGDP Grand Challenge for Development. This is our open call to you. We want governments, we want private sector companies, we want foundations and NGOs around the world to come to us and really, you know, bring to us what are your best ideas specifically around this pillar 3, which I said earlier is so important to us. How can we best change the current regulatory and enabling frameworks to make sure we have a more legal, you know, beneficial, open, equal playing field for women, right? We need to address and, you know, reduce those barriers to women's opportunities across the enabling environment. Again, owning property, accessing credit, being able to travel freely. This is really important. And so what we're looking for is this opportunity to, you know, work with you. So send us your ideas. The Grand Challenge is all about us sourcing the best ideas from around the world. We put funding behind it, and then we pilot these new approaches and see how we can scale them. So please do think about some of these open opportunities, Women Connect Challenge, the WGDP Grand Challenge. And then at the end of this, I will say, you know, we're active in about 70 countries around the world where we have a presence on the ground through our USAID missions. If you're in a country with a USAID mission, please reach out. Say Michelle Bekkering told you to reach out to them. Have a meeting with them. Talk about your ideas. See what the opportunities are. We offer every year a really robust competitive opportunity called an incentive fund, where WGDP, my team, puts money into a collective program, and we source from our missions the best opportunities we think are out there for locally led actors to work with our missions to impact women's economic empowerment. So that's a great opportunity. So please get in touch with the missions. Finally, if you're not in a country where we have a mission on the ground, One, of course, you can get in touch with our embassy, but I also encourage you to directly contact me and my team here in Washington. We have set up an email address that we are actively a part of, and it will come to our inboxes. It's called WGDP@usaid.gov. And give us your ideas. Ask how you can get involved, and we can send you very specific opportunities that might be relevant to you.
Well, that's all very exciting. And so just in our final few moments here, I'd like to introduce you to two of our Community of Democracies youth leads. The youth leads are activists and democracy leaders from across the world, different regions, from Canada to Estonia, through Nepal to Haiti. And they're all young people who have already made contributions towards defending, promoting, and strengthening democracy. And so for those of you who are watching this, I encourage you to look at the stories on our website about the COD youth leads. But we're going to hear from two of them now. I'm going to actually let both of them pose their questions and then have you in our closing segment answer that, Michelle. And so first we're going to hear from Tinatin Obaladze, who's talking to us from Georgia. Tinatin, would you like to ask your question?
Greetings from Georgia. Thank you, Ms. Bekkering, Mr. Garrett, for a really interesting conversation. I want to highlight the importance of women empowerment in Georgia and end the work that U.S. government is doing in Georgia with its WGDP initiative. Thank you very much. So my question is, how can we realize the idea of women becoming catalysts for economic recovery when gender-based violence is intensifying? Women tend to become more vulnerable. Are any specific measures underway from your side to tackle growing tendency of gender-based violence? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tinatin. Before Michelle answers that, let's go ahead and let Ray Sharnak of South Africa pose his question. Ray, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you so much. Ms. Bekkering, the majority of African economies are informal. A large contingency of those informal traders are women. Considering that, the predicament these informal traders find themselves in is not having access to social grants, as the formal economy does not retain enough taxes to sustain a meaningful welfare system. How is USAID willing to assist in formalizing and digitizing the informal sector as the global economy becomes more digital? Thank you.
Two very interesting questions. Michelle, would you like to answer?
Well, first of all, Tinatin and Reyes, what a pleasure to be on this platform with you. You know, I've been able to see your bios, and it's incredible. It's really humbling. Thank you for all you're doing. You are the current and future leaders of your countries, and it's just really exciting to be on this platform. Let me start with Tinatin, and I'm just going to repeat the question. So, Tinatin, what you were asking about, and it's a great question, right? As I understood it is, you know, how do we, you know, recognize our goals of women's economic empowerment and recovery, right? Especially when we're really concerned about the rising rates of gender-based violence, and worried about women being more, you know, vulnerable during the pandemic. And it's frankly a great question. You know, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I just feel like I need to kind of amplify. We are really concerned about that, right? Not only are we looking at the immediate life-giving and life-saving interventions, we're really recognizing the longer-term economic, health, education, and security impacts. And we recognize women and girls are often disproportionately affected, right? So one of the things we did at the beginning of the pandemic, and we continue to look at, you know, one, we recognize, right? We have worked with many humanitarian crises around the world. And what our data has showed us each time in addressing those is rising rates of gender-based violence. And so we were really worried about that trend when the world came into COVID-19, right? We recognized that there was a huge potential that we were going to see a drastic rise in GBV rates. And why is that, right? Well, One, movement is curtailed, right? More women and girls are in, their homes. They're not getting out, right? This can be really challenging, especially for those who live in ongoing, abuse situations. We also recognize a lot of the, vital social services are closed, right? And households are just under daily pressure. So we are recognizing that. So one of the things we're looking at is how do we provide continual opportunities for women, right? And one of the ways we looked at this, you said, sort of that correlation between women's economic empowerment. So we were looking at a lot of things, right? One, we recognize women are going to be catalysts to the economic recovery. We will not recover from this pandemic if women are not active players and leaders in that. And so, as I said earlier, we're really looking at one, how do we give these women more opportunities for their own sort of financial, let's say, survival and independence, right? So we're looking at opportunities to bring more women into jobs, even in the midst of this pandemic. You're hearing me talk a lot about digital, the digital space, and that will be a little bit different when I get to Ray's question, but here's why. We're recognizing there's still an increase in opportunities now in that digital sector, especially with more platforms going to e-commerce. So one of the examples we've done, we were working in Latin America and recognizing there was women in what we would call areas of high poverty and areas where we had real concern about social injustice. And so what we did was we have been training them in digital skills and working with the private sector to allow them opportunities in the rising IT workforce, right? So it was really great. We worked with this local partner called Laboratoria, and we're actually helping these women learn how to code, how to create websites, and other, really, let's say, good paying, but stable jobs in the IT workforce. And that's been really, really important. We're also working to try, as I used the example earlier from Georgia with Malo, trying to work with our private sector partners to help women who are not currently active, let's say in a e-commerce or a larger trade network, to get brought into these larger supply chains so that they have opportunities to move their product. And then finally, we continue to look, how can we bring more women into the male-dominated industries? That's going to be important, especially as we come out of the crisis and we start looking at where are those gaps in employment. We've got a lot of sectors traditionally like the energy sector, hard infrastructure like construction, where we don't see a lot of women. So how can we quickly work to change those environments and to make sure, one, that we can bring more women into these jobs, specifically in jobs that can be done from home? I'm a great example of that, right? I think all of us in our current positions are saying, how can we provide women more opportunities to provide their functions, to do their job, but to do it from home? And so we're really working with companies to try to expand the female workplace at home. So that's kind of a quick answer, and I can come back to it, but for the sake of time, let me hit on Ray's questions too. In some ways, this blends nicely into each other. So Ray was asking us about, the high number of informal traders and, looking at an economy and a continent of Africa, right, where you have a lot of informal economies. And we're really, really worried about that, right? And this goes back again to things such as social and welfare systems. So one of the things we're really trying to do, and as I said earlier, is recognize we need to help bring women from those informal sectors into more formal sectors. And there are ways we can do that, being mindful of the opportunities and the connections they have at hand. So I'm going to give a great example of this, right? We're working diligently to bring more internet connectivity to what would right now be areas without access, right? So oftentimes remote rural areas where, again, we're going to see the informal economy really taking predominance. So we just created partnership with Microsoft we're really excited about. And this has specific interest, probably, Ray, to you, because we're focusing our work here in Africa, in Ghana and Kenya. And what we're doing with and we put $5 million into this, and through this partnership, what we're doing is we're actually going to bring affordable broadband access to users, at least about 10 million people in the next 3 years under an air band coverage, right? And of course, our focus here is on bringing women in. We're starting this in Ghana and Kenya, recognizing this could be a real accelerator and opportunity for women, even in, let's say, the informal sector, to look at more opportunities. And then, as I said earlier, through our Women Connect Challenge, we've partnered actually with one of our partners that came out of this challenge was the Reliance Foundation. And what they're doing is they're providing $4 million to actually create digital services and products that we think will actually, again, help women, especially women in communities where the social conditions don't normally allow their equal access to technology, to really work with women and their families and their communities to sort of right size that issue and to show the advantage to families and women of being able to operate more through internet reasons. So let me stop there. I also mentioned earlier our work, Ray, which I think is really important in the informal economy, which is continuing to support the women's associations, right? A lot of times we have great work. I got to see a really awesome project we were doing through WGDP in Cote d'Ivoire last year, where we were really supporting women in the informal sector, coming together in cooperatives, right? Helping them raise their own capital, putting money behind their own loans. And that is so important to me, because at the end of the day, we have to recognize, again, if we're working in a country where it's primarily informal sector and economy, let's look at where the issues are and let's look at where the opportunities are, but let's be really mindful. And by working with partners such as yourself to get that regional context, I think we can be really smart in not only designing, but implementing interventions that make sense and that are not only successful, but sustainable.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you to the youth leads for those very incisive questions. And so in closing, let me just say thank you, Michelle, and thank you, participants in this conversation today. I know that the issue of women's economic empowerment and how they're going to be key in the economic recovery from COVID-19 is something we're all very, very interested in. The community of democracies was designed to be a place where democracies, both young and established, could come together to share best practices in promoting human rights, strengthening democracy, and talking about the challenges that we all face. Today, I think we learned quite a lot about the approach of the U.S. Agency for International Development in advancing women's economic empowerment globally. And I'm confident some of those good practices we've heard and some of the others we can share are going to be the key, again, to the recovery from the pandemic that we have endured this year. So we look forward at the community of democracies to hosting you for another discussion in the future on these issues. And until the next time we meet, thank you, Michelle. The Secretariat team and I say, stay safe and stay united. Thank you. Bye-bye.